Atheist died and met Jesus. I've been wrong all this time. NDE, before the accident, John Stevens was an ordinary man, living an ordinary life. He had a stable job, a loving family, and a comfortable home in a small town in the Midwest. His days were filled with work, family dinners, and the predictable rhythms of life. But there was one thing that set John apart from many in his community: his staunch disbelief in anything spiritual. An atheist through and through, John saw religion as a crutch for those unwilling to face the harsh realities of life. He dismissed people of faith, including his wife, Sarah, and his brother, Mark, as misguided. His worldview was firmly rooted in logic and science, and anything beyond that was either irrelevant or a product of superstition. Despite the stability of his life, something lingered in the background, a quiet emptiness. John didn't dwell on it, but there were moments when he wondered if there was more to life than what he could see and touch. It was a question that hovered just out of reach, one he ignored, preferring instead to focus on the concrete, rational aspects of existence. But all of that was about to change in a way he could never have imagined. I never believed in God. To me, it was all just made-up stories, fairy tales, and crutches for the weak-minded. I had no use for faith. I believed in what I could see, touch, and measure. Logic and reason were my guides, and anything beyond that didn't make sense. I thought people who believed in Jesus were simply looking for comfort in the unknown, too afraid to face reality. I didn't need religion. I was content with my life the way it was. But that all changed on one ordinary evening. I was driving home from work, the kind of routine day I had 1,000 times before. The roads were quiet, and my mind was buzzing with thoughts of the next day, the bills I had to pay, and how I'd get through the week. I wasn't thinking about faith, or even about life or death. It was just another day. Then in an instant, everything went black. I don't remember the crash, I don't remember the pain, but I remember what came after. I found myself floating in a place that was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't some hallucination, it was real. I was aware of every inch of my being, yet I felt no pain, no fear, just peace, pure, overwhelming peace. And then I saw him. It wasn't like anything I could have imagined. There was no glowing halo, no exaggerated image of what I thought Jesus might look like. It was just him, radiating light and love in a way I couldn't describe, a warmth that pierced through every wall I had built around myself. I wanted to resist. I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. I was overwhelmed, completely undone by the presence in front of me. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. And then he spoke. "You've been wrong all this time," he said, his voice soft yet strong, filled with compassion. "You've been looking for answers, John, but you haven't been looking in the right place." I felt a rush of guilt, of regret. Everything I had believed, everything I had lived for, seemed to crumble in that moment. I had spent my entire life thinking I was right, thinking that I didn't need God, thinking that I was somehow smarter, more enlightened than the people who believed. And now, standing in the presence of someone I couldn't deny, I was forced to confront the truth. I had been wrong. I tried to shake it off. This isn't real, I thought. I'm just imagining this. This is some weird brain thing from the accident. I'm not really here. None of this is real. But it felt real. It felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. The love, the peace, it was so much more than I could comprehend. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with him. In that moment, I was confronted with a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. The man I had dismissed as a myth, the figure I had written off as a delusion, was standing in front of me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have the answers. I didn't know what to think or what to believe. I didn't want to believe it. But I knew, deep down, that this was something I could no longer ignore. I had been wrong all this time. The first few days after the accident were a blur. I was physically injured, but it wasn't just my body that hurt. I was wrestling with something much bigger. My mind kept trying to dismiss what had happened, telling me that it was some kind of near-death hallucination, a trick of my brain. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew what I felt, and I knew what I saw. And that terrified me. I couldn't stop thinking about Jesus, about the love I felt. I wasn't sure if I wanted to believe it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. It felt like a fire inside of me, burning away my doubts and my disbelief, yet it wasn't comfortable. It was like a constant tug of war within me. Sarah, my wife, noticed something was different. She didn't know how to react. She had always been supportive of me, even when we disagreed about religion, but this was something else. She would sit with me while I recovered, but her questions started to pile up. "John, what's going on with you? You've been quiet, distant. Are you okay?" I tried to explain, but the words never came out right. How could I explain to her that I had seen Jesus, that I had felt his presence? How could I make her understand when I didn't even understand myself? "I don't know, Sarah," I would say, my voice shaky. "I don't know what happened, but I feel like I can't ignore it, like something inside me has changed, and I don't know how to deal with it." She was patient, but I could tell she was confused. I had always been the rock in our relationship, the one who kept everything logical and grounded. Now, I was questioning everything. Mark, my brother, was no better. He came by to visit, and I tried to talk to him about what I had experienced, but he just laughed it off. "John, come on, man. You're telling me you saw Jesus? You've got to be kidding me. You've always said it's all nonsense." His reaction stung. He didn't even try to understand. To him, it was just more proof that I was losing it. "You've always been the skeptic," I told him, my voice rising with frustration. "You've always laughed at faith, but this is real. I know it's real." Mark just shook his head, not knowing what to say. It felt like the walls between us were growing taller, and the more I tried to explain, the more isolated I became. I was starting to realize that it wasn't just my beliefs that had shifted. My relationships were changing too. I couldn't talk to Sarah or Mark or anyone the same way. They didn't understand. I felt like I was living in two worlds, one where I had been an atheist, and one where I was now confronted with something so much greater than myself. I was scared of how my life had turned upside down, scared of what I might lose, scared of the changes I was experiencing in my heart. But I knew one thing: I couldn't go back to who I was before, and that was terrifying. The more I tried to ignore what had happened, the more it pressed against me. It was like I could feel it in my bones, this call to something I didn't understand. I couldn't shut it out. I didn't want to, but I was scared of where it was taking me. The truth I had seen felt like a weight that would crush me if I allowed myself to fully accept it. How could I possibly turn my whole life upside down? One night, a few weeks after the accident, I went for a walk alone. I needed some space, a chance to clear my head. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in my own thoughts anymore. I ended up at the small park by the lake, the one I used to visit when I was younger, back when I was still searching for something, though I didn't know what. I sat down on a bench, the cool evening air biting at my skin, the water gently lapping against the shore, and then it happened again, a flash, a vision. This time, it wasn't just a presence of light and warmth. This time, it was a message. I saw myself, older, tired, and worn down, standing in front of a church. But I wasn't the same man I was now. I was different. There was a peace about me that I hadn't seen before, a confidence in the way I stood. Then a voice I knew but couldn't place, spoke to me. "You will be my messenger. You will speak to those who have lost their way. You will show them the love you have found." I was shaken, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to make of it. The vision was so clear, so real. I couldn't deny it. This wasn't some trick. This wasn't some lingering residue from the accident. I stood up, my legs shaking. I felt as if I were about to lose my footing, but then I heard it again. "You've been chosen. It's time to share your story. You must tell them what you've learned." I didn't know what to do with that. How could I be the one to spread this message? I wasn't a preacher. I wasn't even someone people would turn to for spiritual advice. I was just a man who had spent years mocking faith, rejecting everything that came with it. I was no one special, but in that moment I knew. I knew I had to follow this path. I had to embrace what I had seen. I had to tell people about Jesus, about the truth I had experienced, even if it meant facing rejection, even if it meant alienating the few people who still stood by me. The fear didn't go away, but something inside of me shifted. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but I understood now. I had been wrong all this time. I had dismissed something so much bigger than myself, and now I couldn't ignore it anymore. The days following that vision were some of the hardest of my life. I couldn't escape the message, the call, but I also couldn't escape the weight of what I was about to face. I had been living in a bubble, one where the world I knew made sense. But now that bubble had burst, and everything around me felt foreign. I tried to talk to Sarah about the vision. I needed her to understand, to stand with me in this. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw the fear. She was scared. Scared of what I was becoming, scared of what this would mean for us. "John, you don't have to do this," Sarah said one night, her voice soft but pleading. "You've been through so much. You're still healing. Maybe this is just part of your recovery, part of the trauma from the accident. We can work through this together. But please, don't make any rash decisions. You've always been the one to reject faith. I don't want you to lose yourself in something you don't even understand." I felt the pull between her concern and my own overwhelming desire to follow what I now believed to be the truth. But her words hurt. They stung because they came from a place of love, a place of wanting to protect me from what she saw as an overwhelming burden. I didn't know how to explain to her that I wasn't losing myself, I was finding myself. This wasn't some phase I was going through. I could feel it deep inside me. I wasn't the man I had been before. Mark was worse. He took one look at me and told me to snap out of it. "This is crazy, John," he said, shaking his head. "You've been through something traumatic, and now you're acting like some kind of zealot. You really think you're hearing voices, seeing visions? You've always been the rational one. What happened to you?" His words stung more than I expected. Mark had always been the skeptic, just like me. But this was different. The anger and disbelief in his voice made me feel like a stranger. It was as if I had become someone he no longer recognized. "You don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I can't ignore this, Mark. I can't go back to the way things were. This is real." But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. Mark couldn't see it, and neither could Sarah. My closest family members, the ones who had always known me, were now standing on the other side of a line that felt insurmountable. I couldn't force them to believe, and I didn't want to make them. But I couldn't suppress this new fire inside of me either. I started to turn to other people who might understand. Rachel, a local woman who had always been open about her faith, became a confidant. I'd known her for years, but we never really talked about religion before. She was gentle, patient, and didn't pressure me. She simply listened. One day, after a long conversation, she said something that stuck with me. "Faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting in something bigger than ourselves. It's about letting go of control and allowing God to lead you, even when it doesn't make sense." Her words were like a balm to my soul. Slowly, I began to feel more at peace with the direction my life was taking, but the struggle with my family remained. As the weeks passed, the distance between me and the people I loved seemed to grow. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn closer to someone, that was worth everything I was losing. As I continued to process the new direction my life was taking, I faced challenges I hadn't expected. The road ahead wasn't just about reconciling my beliefs with the reality of what I had seen. It was about navigating the growing distance between me and the people I loved. And to make things even harder, there was an internal battle brewing within me. My job, which had once been a steady, stable part of my life, began to feel hollow. I had worked as a project manager for a construction company, but the more I delved into my spiritual journey, the more I realized how out of alignment my daily work was with my values. The people I worked with had no understanding of what I was going through. The language we spoke, the way we treated people, the way we chased after success for the sake of success, felt increasingly shallow. There were mornings when I would sit at my desk, staring at the screen, unable to focus on the numbers and contracts in front of me. My mind kept drifting back to the peace I had felt during my vision, the overwhelming love that had wrapped around me. I was starting to question everything about my life. Was this really what I was meant to do? Was this where I was supposed to be? Or was there something more I was supposed to give, something deeper than this? One night, when I got home, I found myself talking to Sarah about quitting my job. I just don't feel right about it anymore, I told her, my voice uncertain. I've been thinking, maybe I need to change direction. Maybe I need to do something that aligns more with what I'm feeling, something that brings me closer to the truth. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. John, I don't know what's happening to you, but you can't just throw everything away. You have responsibilities. We have bills. You can't just walk away from it all without thinking it through. What are we supposed to do if you leave your job? How will we make it? Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I understood her fear. She had always been practical, grounded in reality. I knew she wasn't just worried about the job. She was worried about the changes in me, the ones she didn't fully understand. But deep down, I also knew that something had shifted. I couldn't ignore it, no matter how much it scared both of us. Then there was Mark. As if the tension with Sarah wasn't enough, my brother's rejection of my newfound beliefs grew more intense. He started mocking me, calling me out in front of friends and family. He'd say things like, "John, you're just looking for something to believe in because you're scared. This Jesus stuff isn't real. You've always been smarter than this." It hurt more than I cared to admit. Mark was the one person who had always been there for me. We'd grown up together, fought through our differences, and shared everything. But now, he was pushing me away. Every conversation seemed to end in an argument, and I could feel the rift widening. I didn't know where to turn. There was no one who truly understood what I was experiencing. My faith was growing, but so was my sense of isolation. Even the people I had once relied on seemed to be drifting away, unwilling to accept the changes happening inside of me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, a new challenge presented itself. I started to experience what I could only describe as visions, flashes of future events, things that hadn't happened yet but felt incredibly real. It was like my eyes were being opened to something beyond my understanding. The visions were brief but vivid, leaving me with more questions than answers. One evening, after a particularly intense vision, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. I had to act. I had to share what I was experiencing, even if it meant losing everything. But the fear was still there, lurking in the background. How could I continue this journey when so many people, including my own family, rejected it? As the days turned into weeks, my journey became even more complex. The external challenges, the tensions with Sarah and Mark, the uncertainty about my job, all of it weighed heavily on me. But the hardest part, the most exhausting part, was what was happening inside me. I was battling feelings of isolation, doubt, and a sense of being torn between two worlds. One evening, Sarah and I had a conversation that nearly broke me. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the soft light of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet desperation of someone who was trying to hold things together, while everything around her seemed to be falling apart. "John," she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about all of this. About your visions, your new beliefs, and the changes you're going through. I'm scared. I don't know who you are anymore." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. "Sarah, I haven't changed," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm still the same person, but something inside me is different, and I can't ignore it. I feel like I'm being called to something greater than anything I've ever known." She shook her head. "I don't understand. I know you're struggling, but you're losing yourself in something I don't understand. I need the man I married, the one who didn't believe in all of this. What happened to that person? Is he gone for good?" I wanted to reach out to her, to hold her and reassure her, but the truth was, I didn't know how to reassure myself. I didn't know what would happen to me, to us, if I kept walking down this path. But what I did know was that I couldn't stop. I couldn't just pretend that what had happened to me wasn't real. "I'm still here, Sarah," I said quietly, "but I can't go back to who I was. This isn't just some phase. I've seen something, felt something, and I can't ignore it. I don't expect you to understand, but I need you to know that this is real. I can't live in this confusion anymore." The silence between us was deafening. The walls seemed to close in as we both sat there, unable to find the right words. I could feel her retreating from me, her heart pulling away from mine, even though she didn't want to. That night, I went to bed feeling more alone than ever. I couldn't shake the sense that I was walking this path by myself. There was so much I wanted to share with Sarah, so much I wanted to explain, but she wasn't ready to hear it. And I didn't know if she ever would be. The emotional weight of it all became unbearable. Every day felt like a battle. I could see it in her eyes. Every time I spoke about the visions, the voice I had heard, the new purpose I was beginning to follow, she recoiled. It wasn't just a lack of understanding. It was fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of the unknown. But it wasn't just Sarah. Even Rachel, the one person who had shown me some semblance of understanding, started to express concern. "John, you need to be careful," she said one day as we sat together in a quiet corner of the coffee shop. "This can be a dangerous path. The enemy is real, and you don't want to go too far down the road of deception." Her words shocked me. Rachel had always been so kind, so open, but now her caution made me question myself. Was I being deceived? Was this vision, this calling, real, or was I just losing my mind? The internal conflict raged inside me. Every day I felt like I was on the verge of something bigger, but every night I lay awake wondering if I was just fooling myself. Was this truly a divine revelation, or was I simply grasping for meaning in the chaos of my life? I had never felt more torn, more uncertain, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it. My family didn't understand. Rachel was trying to protect me from what she saw as dangerous. I was alone in a way that felt suffocating. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't turn back. I couldn't walk away from what I had seen, what I had felt. But would I lose everything? My family, my sense of self, along the way? As my journey continued, the tension in my life only seemed to escalate. I thought things would eventually settle down, that Sarah and Mark might come to terms with what I was experiencing. But the more I embraced my new beliefs, the more I felt like I was being drawn away from everything I had known. The visions I had been experiencing intensified. They became more vivid, more urgent. I saw images of places I'd never been, people I didn't recognize. Sometimes it felt like I was being shown glimpses of the future, but other times I couldn't tell if it was past, present, or something else entirely. One moment, I'd see myself standing in front of a massive congregation, speaking to them with a confidence I didn't possess in reality. The next, I was in a quiet, dark place, hearing a voice whispering to me, urging me to step forward into the unknown. The whispering voice would always say the same thing: "You are chosen." But the strange part was that these visions didn't just stay in my head, they started to bleed into my waking life. One evening, while I was out walking, I bumped into a stranger. He was an older man, weathered by life, with a kind but serious look in his eyes. He stopped me on the sidewalk and said, "You're running from your calling. You know this, don't you?" I froze, staring at him. My heart was racing, my mind a blur. How could he know? I hadn't told anyone about the visions. I hadn't shared anything about the voice, the feeling that I was being guided towards something greater. But there it was, spoken aloud by someone I had never met. The strange part was, his voice wasn't accusing. It was knowing, like he had seen me in a way no one else had. "You have a purpose," he continued, his voice calm but insistent. "Don't be afraid to follow it, but remember, this journey is not yours alone." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night before I could even respond. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Was this a sign? Was this man part of the vision? Or was he someone I was meant to meet? It felt like I was being watched, like forces were pushing me in a direction I didn't fully understand yet. This wasn't just a personal journey anymore. Something much larger was at play. I couldn't ignore it. The pressure, the sense of urgency was growing every day. It felt as if I was at a crossroads, but I didn't know which path would lead me to peace. Every step forward felt like I was being guided by unseen hands, but I couldn't be sure if I was walking in the right direction. I started to keep a journal, writing down the details of my visions, the things I was feeling, the moments of clarity. It was like I was piecing together a puzzle, but I wasn't sure if I had all the pieces yet. The more I wrote, the more I began to realize how much had changed inside me. I wasn't the same man I had been before the accident, before the vision. Something had awakened in me, and it was relentless. But the questions kept piling up. What was my role in all of this? Why me? And if I was chosen, what was I supposed to do with that knowledge? Was I ready for what was to come? As I struggled to piece together the fragments of my new reality, the emotional and spiritual tension within me intensified. The visions, the whispers, and the growing sense of purpose were all too real to ignore. But the more I delved into this journey, the more I found myself alienated from the people I loved most, those who were still anchored in the world I had left behind. Sarah's unease only deepened. I could see the way she withdrew from me more and more, not just emotionally, but physically. Our conversations became shorter, more strained. Even when we were together, there was an invisible wall between us that seemed to grow with every passing day. It wasn't just the differences in our beliefs that created this distance. It was the fear that I might be slipping away from her, from the life we had built together. One evening, after another long day at work, I came home to find Sarah sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I sat down beside her, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Sarah," I started, my voice tentative. "I've been thinking about what happened with the man on the street. I don't know what it means, but I feel like something bigger is at play. I'm scared too, but I can't just ignore it. I'm being pulled in a direction I don't understand, and I need you to understand that I'm not doing this to hurt you." She didn't look at me right away, her hands tightly gripping the armrest of the couch. When she finally turned her head to meet my gaze, I saw tears in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything is fine when you're becoming someone I don't recognize. I've tried, I really have, but I'm scared that I'm losing you." The weight of her words crushed me. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't lost, that I was still the same man who had promised to love and cherish her. But in that moment, I couldn't even reassure myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. How could I ask her to trust me when I wasn't sure where I was going? "I don't want to lose you, Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. "But I don't know how to turn this off. I can't ignore it anymore." Her silence was more painful than any argument we had ever had. The space between us felt wider than ever before. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't even know if it could be fixed. As I struggled to reconcile the growing distance between us, another character began to play a more significant role in my life. Rachel. I had always thought of her as just a friend, someone I could talk to when things got tough. But as I grew more desperate for understanding, I turned to her for support in ways I hadn't before. Rachel was different from the others. She was more open-minded, more willing to entertain the idea that my journey might be real, even if she didn't fully understand it. And yet, even she had her doubts. One day, after I shared another intense vision with her, she looked at me with a mix of concern and compassion. "John, I want to believe you. I really do. But I'm starting to worry. This is so much bigger than you and me, and I don't know if you're ready for it. Sometimes, when you open yourself up to something like this, you invite things that aren't good for you, things that can take you further from the truth." Her words made me pause. I had never seen Rachel so serious, so cautious. "Do you think I'm making a mistake?" I asked, the vulnerability in my voice clear. "I don't know," she admitted, shaking her head. "But I think you need to be careful. You're chasing something that's beyond your control. And if you're not careful, it could swallow you whole." Her warning stayed with me long after our conversation ended. Was I chasing something dangerous? Was I really being guided by God, or was I simply following an illusion? The doubts that had once seemed distant were now creeping into my mind, threatening to undo everything I had experienced so far. But even in the midst of this uncertainty, something deep within me told me to press on. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't even sure if I was on the right path. But there was a fire in my soul that refused to be extinguished, no matter the cost. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, a precipice where every decision I made seemed to have the potential to change my life forever. The visions continued, relentless and unyielding, but so did the weight of the conflict I was living with. As the tension between my old life and my new beliefs deepened, it seemed like every part of my world was coming to a boiling point. It wasn't just Sarah anymore. my friends, my colleagues, even distant family members, everyone seemed to have an opinion on what I was going through. And those opinions weren't always supportive. Many of them saw the changes I was experiencing as dangerous, even delusional. Rachel's warnings, though filled with care, began to echo in my mind more and more. She had been right about one thing. I was no longer in control of the situation. It was bigger than me now. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table trying to make sense of the visions, I heard a knock at the door. It was Mark, a longtime friend of mine. He had always been a staunch atheist, someone I'd had many deep philosophical conversations with over the years. I had always admired his skepticism, but tonight, his face was drawn and serious. "John, we need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I nodded, motioning for him to sit down across from me. "What's on your mind, Mark?" He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to measure whether he should say what was on his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tense. "I've been hearing things, people talking. Sarah, your family, they're worried about you, man. I'm worried about you." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I had known this moment would come. I had known it, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "Worried about what?" "Mark, you've seen the way my life was before all of this. It was empty. I was just going through the motions. I didn't have any real purpose. But now, I'm being shown something. I'm being shown the truth." Mark looked at me incredulously. "The truth? John, this isn't the truth. You're losing your mind. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. You've changed. You're not the man I knew anymore." His words struck harder than I expected. They hit me in a way that felt like a direct attack on my very being. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to maintain control of my emotions. "I'm still the same person, Mark," I said, my voice steady but fierce. "What I've seen, what I've experienced, it's real. It's more real than anything I've ever known. I can't go back to who I was. I can't live that empty life again." Mark didn't respond at first. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes filled with something like pity. "John, I'm not saying I don't care about you, but I'm scared for you. You're chasing something that's out of your control. This isn't some religious awakening. It's a psychosis, a breakdown. And if you don't get a handle on it, it's going to destroy you." The weight of his words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I wanted to shout, to tell him he was wrong. But deep down, a part of me couldn't ignore the seed of doubt he had planted. Was I really losing myself? Had I been deceived? Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with the sense that everything was slipping away from me. The people I loved, the life I had known, could I really keep going down this road? Was it possible that the very thing I thought was guiding me toward truth was actually leading me to destruction? In that moment, something inside me broke. I stood up, pacing back and forth as I tried to reconcile everything I was feeling. "What am I supposed to do, Mark?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I can't turn back. I can't just ignore what's happening. It feels like I'm being called for something greater, something beyond me. How am I supposed to deny that?" Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, putting his hand on my shoulder. "I don't know what's happening to you, John, but I do know that I care about you. I don't want to see you fall apart." The sincerity in his voice was enough to make my throat tighten. I had always trusted Mark's judgment, but now I found myself questioning everything. Was this just a phase I was going through? Or was I truly on the path to something greater? As Mark left, I sat down at the table, my head spinning. Every part of me felt torn. Was I making a mistake by continuing this journey? Or was this the truth I had been searching for all along? The days that followed felt like a battle. On one side was the weight of my old life, the expectations, the people who still saw me as the man I used to be. On the other, a new force was pulling at me, urging me to embrace a truth that felt both terrifying and liberating. I could feel the tension building inside me, as if I were walking a tightrope, one step away from falling into chaos or finding salvation. Sarah and I hadn't spoken much since our last conversation. She had retreated further into herself, no longer willing to pretend that everything was okay. I tried to reach out to her, tried to explain that I wasn't abandoning her, that I was simply following something I couldn't ignore. But the more I tried, the more I felt like I was pushing her away. Her silence was deafening. and every word I said seemed to fall on deaf ears. One evening, after yet another failed attempt at talking with her, I found myself alone in my apartment, staring at the open journal on my table. I'd been writing down everything, the visions, the feelings, the overwhelming sense of purpose that kept rising within me. But tonight something was different. Tonight there was a desperation in the air. The visions had become more intense, more vivid, and I knew that something big was about to happen. I closed my eyes, willing myself to focus, and in the stillness of the room, the vision came. It was as if I was being drawn into another world, a world I had never known. The bright, radiant light, the voice calling my name, the overwhelming sense of peace. It was all there, just like before. But this time it was different. I was not alone. I felt a presence beside me, standing just out of view. A figure, not quite human, yet not entirely otherworldly. The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the light around me seemed to grow even brighter. Then a voice spoke, soft yet powerful. "You are chosen. This is your moment." Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of the words hit me. Chosen? What did that even mean? My heart raced, my mind spinning. The presence beside me seemed to be waiting for something, and for the first time I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just on some spiritual journey for my own benefit. This was about something far greater than me. This was about a mission, a calling. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The presence reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder, and suddenly I was filled with a sense of peace. The overwhelming fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, they all began to melt away, replaced by an undeniable sense of purpose. The moment broke, and I found myself back in the real world, gasping for breath, my heart pounding. I knew that everything had changed. It wasn't just a vision, it was a call to something I could no longer deny. But the question that followed weighed heavily on me. What now? I had come so far, but I was still torn. Torn between the life I had known and the life I was being called to. I had spent so much time fighting to hold on to my old identity, to the comfort of my past, but now it seemed clear that I could no longer keep both. The confrontation with Sarah was inevitable. I couldn't avoid it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I wasn't changing, that I wasn't being pulled in a direction I didn't fully understand. I found her sitting in the kitchen one evening, her eyes red from crying. It hurt to see her like this. Hurt because I knew I had a part in it. But I couldn't walk away from this anymore. I couldn't keep hiding. "Sarah," I said softly, sitting down across from her. "I've seen the truth, and it's bigger than anything I ever imagined. I'm being called, but I can't do this without you. I can't do this without your understanding." She looked up at me, her face a mixture of fear, confusion, and pain. "John, I don't understand what's happening to you. I don't know how to fix this, and I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is okay. You're becoming someone I don't recognize, and I don't know how to live with that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her everything, to explain the peace, the love, the truth I had found. But I realized then that the hardest part wasn't the vision, the calling, or even the tension with my old beliefs. The hardest part was the potential of losing the people I loved the most, especially Sarah. But I couldn't turn back. I couldn't pretend that what I had experienced wasn't real. The choice had been made for me, and now I had to walk the path, no matter how painful. "I love you, Sarah," I said, my voice cracking, "but I have to do this. I have to follow what I've seen, what I've been shown, and I hope in time you'll understand." The silence that followed was deafening. Neither of us knew what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no going back now. This was the moment where everything would change. The days that followed felt like an emotional roller coaster, each moment carrying the weight of a decision that could not be undone. The tension between Sarah and me reached a boiling point. She wasn't the only one who felt the strain. I did too. There was a growing chasm between us, one that I feared could never be bridged. But as the days wore on, the more I realized, no matter how much I longed to hold on to the life I had before, I was no longer the same person. I could feel God's presence in a way that defied any explanation. It was like a constant pull, a force that grew stronger the more I resisted. It wasn't just a religious feeling, it was an undeniable truth. Everything that I thought I understood about life, about faith, about myself, was being turned on its head. There was no room for complacency anymore, but the cost was steep. I was losing Sarah, the woman I had loved for years. I was losing friends who didn't understand the radical transformation I was undergoing. And most painfully of all, I was losing my own sense of peace. The internal conflict was unbearable. One moment I would feel peace beyond words, and in the next, guilt and fear would come rushing in like a tidal wave. I was caught between the life I had known and the life I was being called to. The final confrontation with Sarah seemed inevitable. I had spent days contemplating what to say, how to explain myself, how to make her understand. But no matter how much I prepared, I knew it wouldn't be enough. There were no words that could undo the pain, no words that could bridge the gap between the man I was and the man I was becoming. It was late one night when she came to me. I had been sitting in the living room, staring at the blank wall in front of me, as if willing some sort of answer to appear. My thoughts were a blur, a mixture of emotions too complex to process. "John," Sarah's voice cut through the silence, and I looked up. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and worn with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, a sign that she had been crying. I could feel the tension rise as I stood to face her. There was no avoiding it any longer. She had made up her mind. This was the moment of reckoning. "I don't know what's happening to you," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know who you are anymore, but I can't keep doing this. I can't watch you disappear into something I don't understand." I felt my heart break as her words cut through me. "I'm still here, Sarah. I'm still the man you married, but I've seen the truth. I've felt the presence of God, and I can't ignore it any longer. It's tearing me apart, but I can't go back. I can't pretend that everything is normal when it isn't." Her face twisted with frustration, a mix of fear and sadness. "But I don't know how to be with you if you're not the same. I don't know how to love someone who believes that all of this chaos is real." I stepped forward, reaching out for her, but she stepped back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Please, Sarah," I pleaded. "I don't want to lose you, but I can't lose this either. I don't know how to make you understand." She shook her head, the tears welling up once more. "I don't know what to say anymore, John. Maybe you're right. Maybe you've found something I don't see. But I can't keep waiting for the man I married to come back. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with this. I'm sorry." And just like that, the door to our life together seemed to close. The weight of it was unbearable, but I knew, deep down, that there was no turning back. I had tried everything to make her understand, but the truth I had found was too powerful to ignore. The next few days were filled with silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any words ever could. I could feel the heaviness of her absence in every corner of the house, in every room I entered. But there was something else too. Amid the grief, amid the pain, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew I was on the right path, even if that path had led me to lose the person I loved most. As the days went on, I began to see that the choice I had made was not just about Sarah or about the life I had once known. It was about something much bigger. It was about my salvation, my redemption, and no matter the cost, I knew I had to continue forward. The day I truly faced the climax of my journey, everything that had been swirling in my heart, my mind, and my soul collided into one overwhelming moment. It was a moment that had been building up for weeks, maybe even months, without me fully realizing it. But now, standing at this crossroad, I couldn't deny it any longer. Everything had led to this. The pain, the heartache, the confusion, and the peace that had washed over me in moments of grace. It was a Sunday morning, a day like any other, but the difference was that today felt different. There was an undeniable heaviness in the air. I had made my peace with the fact that Sarah and I might never find our way back to each other. But in my heart, I still clung to the hope that I could live out this calling that had gripped me. I wanted to be a vessel of God's love, His truth, but deep inside I still wrestled with the fear that the changes in me were too much, too fast. Could I truly be redeemed? Could I be worthy of the purpose I was being called to? I walked into church, my heart pounding in my chest. I was not the same man who had once walked in here years ago. My faith was no longer theoretical. It was real, living, and I couldn't ignore it. I stood at the back of the sanctuary for a moment, my eyes scanning the rows of faces, some familiar, some strangers, wondering what they saw when they looked at me. A part of me feared judgment, while another part wanted to stand before them and proclaim the truth I had found. I stepped forward as the service began. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it was as if my whole being had been magnetized to this place. As the pastor began to speak, the words that flowed from him felt like they were meant for me alone. There are moments in life, he said, when we must make the choice to turn toward the truth, no matter the cost. No matter how far we've gone down the wrong road, God's grace is always there to bring us back. His words hit me like a tidal wave. I had heard these messages countless times before, but today they were different. It wasn't just a sermon. It wasn't just a story. It was the reality I was living. And as the pastor spoke of redemption, of grace, I felt something stirring deep inside of me. I knew in that moment that the internal battle I had been fighting, between my past and this new identity I was embracing, had come to its climax. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that I had been running from the truth, running from God's love, because I didn't feel worthy. But now I could feel His presence in me, around me, filling me with peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I knew that the answer to my spiritual questions wasn't out there in the world. It wasn't in the arguments I had with others, or in the doubts I had clung to. It was here, in my heart, and it had always been here. I knelt down in that moment, unable to hold back the tears any longer. I whispered the words I had been too afraid to speak for so long. Jesus, I've been wrong all this time. I've been running from you, but I'm ready now. I'm ready to accept your grace. I'm ready to follow you wherever you lead. As the words left my lips, it felt like the heavens opened. A sense of peace washed over me, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my soul. The doubts, the fears, the confusion, they all vanished in that instant. I wasn't who I used to be. I was someone new, someone redeemed, someone loved. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly home. I looked around, realizing that the people in the church weren't staring at me with judgment or suspicion. They were there with open hearts, understanding the struggle that had brought me to this moment. I had found a place of grace, a place where I didn't have to be perfect, a place where I could fall and still be lifted up. As the service came to an end, I stood, my heart overflowing with gratitude. I walked out of the church, not with answers to every question, not with all my struggles resolved, but with the certainty that I was no longer alone. God was with me, and I had made the choice to embrace His call. The journey wasn't over, but this moment had marked the beginning of something beautiful. Something I couldn't have imagined before, but now I was ready to live it fully. The days following that moment in church were not easy, but they were filled with a deep sense of peace I had never known. It wasn't a peace that came from having everything figured out or from an absence of struggle. In fact, life continued to challenge me in ways I had never anticipated. I still faced the fallout from my transformation, losing friends, facing misunderstandings, and grappling with the reality that some people, like Sarah, might never understand the depth of the change I had gone through. But within me was a certainty I had never felt before. I had been on a spiritual journey for so long, seeking answers to questions that haunted me, looking for meaning in a world that seemed so confusing. What I had come to understand, however, was that the answers weren't somewhere out there to be found. They were within. And the most profound truth I had discovered was that I didn't have to have it all together, and I didn't have to pretend to be perfect. I just had to accept God's grace and allow Him to lead me. Looking back, I realized that everything that happened, the doubts, the fears, the heartbreak, and the revelations, were part of God's plan for me. He had always been there, waiting for me to recognize His presence and surrender to His will. My near-death experience had been the catalyst, the awakening that brought me to the point where I could no longer deny His existence. But even in my darkest moments, I could see how He was guiding me, working in the background, preparing me for the life I now walk. I don't know what the future holds, and I still struggle at times. I still face challenges that make me question the path I've chosen, but I also know that I am not alone in this journey. Every step I take, I am held by grace, guided by love, and assured that God has a purpose for me. I may not always understand it, but I know it is real. If you're watching this and feeling like I once did, lost, confused, or even resistant to the idea of God's love, know that you're not alone. Your journey may be different from mine, but the truth is that God is there, waiting for you to turn to Him. It doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done. His grace is bigger than anything in your past. Just as He showed up for me, He's waiting to show up for you. I invite you to reflect on your own life and beliefs. Where are you in your own journey? Are you ready to open your heart to the possibility that there is something greater at work in your life? If you are, I encourage you to take the step that I took. Embrace the truth, seek God, and trust that He will guide you, just as He has guided me. Thank you for being part of this story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something in your heart, please subscribe, like, and comment below. I would love to hear from you. Where are you from, and what's your story? Let's continue this conversation together. And if you're struggling, know that you're not alone. God is with you, and there is always hope, no matter where you are in your journey.